it looks like you want some new books to read, and I have 8 options for you in here. They're mostly fiction. There's a couple of nonfiction options in here as well, if that's more of your thing. I'm gonna leave all of these linked in the description box down below, and yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. Yeah, let's get started. Just like that. The first book is probably one of my all-time favorites. It's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and this is fiction. It's kind of historical fiction, and it has a little bit of romance, and it's also fantasy. But it's not fantasy in the way that I think most people would picture when they hear that word. So let me just tell you the premise. It follows Addie LaRue, obviously, and it starts off in the 18th century in France when she wants to escape this very simple, small village kind of life that she has. So she makes a deal with this dark god, dark entity type of thing. She doesn't really know what she's getting into, but essentially this deal means that she gets to be immortal and live forever, but she's forgotten by anybody she ever meets as soon as she's out of sight. So if you think about it, this means that she can't ever have like a job or a permanent place to live because like the landlord would forget about her. She can't ever have any kind of meaningful friendships or relationships or anything like that. But it also means that she can steal and sneak into places because people would forget about it as soon as it happened. But essentially she's just wandering the world and exploring and pushing the limits of what her curse means, somehow trying to make a mark in this world. But then one day, centuries later, more in the modern day era, she meets this guy at a bookstore and he actually remembers her. And obviously this is a huge deal because she's been lonely forever and hasn't been able to make any kind of meaningful connection. So she meets this guy, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm not gonna tell you anything else. You can find out how that whole thing develops, but this is so well written and the structure is very clever and the world building is really good. It did take me a little bit to really get into it, but once you do, it is so worth it. I would 10 out of 10 recommend this. Definitely one of my all-time favorites. Okay, next up we have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, and this is a mystery. It's also young adult fiction, so prepare for the writing style to be very, very YA. But I feel like even if that's not your style or you've outgrown it a little bit, the story will still draw you in. So it follows this girl, Pip, who decides to make her high school final year project be on this murder investigation. Essentially, there was this girl from her own high school, Andy Bell, who had been supposedly murdered by her boyfriend, Sal Singh, and then he committed suicide right after. But it seems like things are not really adding up to this girl, Pip, so she decides to conduct her own kind of investigation. But as she tries to put the puzzle pieces together, it seems like somebody's not too happy about that, so things get a little bit dangerous. But yeah, this was such a page turner. I just like had to find out what happened. It's a fairly easy read, so if you're just looking for something that's very quick and maybe something that will get you out of a reading slump, then this is definitely it. You guys, you must read this book. It's so freaking good. This is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and this is technically a part of a duology, so it goes Six of Crows and then it goes Crooked Kingdom. I'm not making Crooked Kingdom be one of the official books that I'm recommending in this video, but if you do like this, then you have something else to read right after as well. Now, this is set in the Grishaverse universe, and stay with me, okay? So the Grishaverse universe was actually first set up by Shadow and Bone, if you've heard of it. This right here, or maybe you've heard of the Netflix show or you've seen the Netflix show. But yeah, Shadow and Bone is this trilogy right here that sets up the Grishaverse universe. And technically I did read these before I read Six of Crows, and it was kind of helpful in understanding the world building and everything. But I don't think that it's absolutely crucial that you read the trilogy before you read the duology, because honestly, the duology does a very good job of setting things up as well. And it's its own different story with its own characters, and it's kind of in a different part of the world within the Grishaverse universe. So yeah, and admittedly, I did like the Six of Crows duology better than the trilogy, so you could always start there, and then if you do like them, you can venture out to see the other ones as well. But yeah, I mean, if you've seen the Netflix show Shadow and Bone, then, I mean, there's some things that were like really well done in it, and the casting was really great, but I still recommend that you just read the book. It is so good. It's about these 6 outcasts that try and pull off this really, really big heist to get really rich. And they all have very specific moral compasses and very specific set of skills and very different personalities that just make for a very interesting dynamic. It kind of has the found family theme, which I just absolutely love. And the character development in these books is just so freaking good, and you get different perspectives from each of the characters, which I actually really like for this. And yeah, it's really clever, it's action-packed, it's a heist, so it's really fun, and you guys should definitely read it. I fear I might have just rambled on a little bit too long about these books, but I guess I just like to yap about things that I like, and I really like this, so definitely read it. Moving on, we have some nonfiction, and this is another one of my all-time favorites. It is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and it explores what factors lead to success and how successful people become the way that they are. He says that while, yes, you do need to be talented and hardworking, a lot of what success is just comes down to external factors, way more than we would think it does, and just things that you have no control over. It's very interesting to see how things like family upbringing and timing and honestly just pure luck have to do with success. It has some really, really fascinating stories, and it breaks down statistics and some studies in a very easy way to follow. So if you're looking for a really good nonfiction read, then this is definitely for you. I think it'll give you some really great insight and new perspectives into success. Next up is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and this is a fiction novel that follows a woman called Nora who finds herself in this library that's essentially a limbo space between life and death, and each of the books in this library represents a different version of herself, a different life that she could have had if she'd made different choices. And she does get the opportunity to try out these alternate lives, these alternate versions of herself. And by the end of the book, she must ultimately make a decision, and I'll let you figure out exactly what that is when you do read it. But yeah, I just thought this was a pretty interesting concept. And while it is fiction, it does sometimes feel a little bit like a self-help book, just because it does make you think about the meaning of life and happiness and regrets and what your choices do to your life and whatnot. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I will say it took me a little bit to get into this one, just because I didn't love the protagonist at first, but then it does get better, and the chapters are pretty short, so it does make it a pretty easy read. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this one as well. I already did one book by V. Schwab, but I have to do another one because this one's also so good. It's called Vicious, and it's actually part of a duology, so it goes Vicious and then it goes Vengeful. But if you just wanted to read Vicious on its own, you'd be totally fine to do so. I still like the sequel, but I honestly think this could have been its own standalone book as well. But yeah, it is fiction, kind of science fiction, and there is a bit of a thriller element to it, I would say. It's about these 2 college roommates, Eli and Victor, who are really interested in the idea that near-death experiences might give someone extraordinary abilities. That's what they call it in the book, extraordinaries, but it's basically just superpowers. So they decide to conduct their own experiments, and that's where things get really, really interesting. And I'll just let you find out what happens because I don't want to spoil it for you, but let me just tell you, it is really interesting, it is really well written, and the ending is so freaking good. And like I said, if you do end up liking it, then you do have something to read as the sequel, but it can also just be a standalone book. And yeah, I would definitely recommend it. Next is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. This is a mystery novel set in Paris, obviously, and it follows this girl, Jess, who is in a little bit of trouble, so she calls up her brother, Ben, and asks him if she can crash at his apartment in Paris. But when she does get there, he's not picking up his phone, he's not texting back, anything like that. She does manage to get into the apartment, and she's a little bit weirded out by the fact that he has a really nice apartment and he's just a freelance journalist, and there's some other things in the apartment that just don't really seem to be adding up. So she starts to do a little bit of digging, and she asks the neighbors if they know anything about Ben and where he might be, and the neighbors are all a little bit kind of strange. They just have particular personalities. So it turns very quickly into a whodunit kind of story. You're constantly being taken on turns on who knows what might have happened to Ben or where he might be or anything like that. So it's pretty interesting. It's a good mystery, and the chapters are very short and very easy to follow. So if you're just looking for something fast-paced, then this is definitely the book for you. And last but not least is Atomic Habits by James Clear. This is the only other nonfiction book in this lineup. It is a self-help book, and I read it for the very first time a long time ago, but I do still implement a lot of the tips from it into my own habits. And I know this is cheesy, but I would say that it did change my life in some way, so maybe it'll help you do the same. It has some really great tips on how to change your own habits and the science behind habit formation. It has some great true stories about Olympic athletes and business leaders and artists that I think are very insightful and inspirational. So if you're looking for a self-help read that might help you change your life for the better, then this is a really good one. I know I personally need to kind of reread it because some of my habits are an absolute mess. But yeah, it's a popular book for a reason, and that is it. Those are all the books. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Once again, I'm gonna leave all of them linked in the description box down below. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. I kicked the camera.